history is not written by grand armies alone, but sometimes by the whisper of a single, perfectly designed wing cutting through a hostile sky. It is written in the moments when despair seems absolute, and a single innovation arrives to rewrite the rules of the fight, to turn the tide, not with a shout, but with the unmistakable growl of a new kind of engine. This is the story of such a moment, a story of how a silver ghost of a machine became the guardian angel of the air, and in doing so, changed the world. In the bleak, grinding years of the mid-Second World War, the skies over Europe were a graveyard. Day after day, a generation of brave young men climbed into the bellies of B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, the mission to cripple the war machine of the Third Reich from above. They flew with courage, but they flew into a storm of lead and fury. The problem was distance. Their fighter escorts, the rugged P-47 Thunderbolts and the twin-boomed P-38 Lightnings, were formidable aircraft, but they were tethered by their fuel tanks. At a certain point, deep over enemy territory, they would have to waggle their wings in a heartbreaking farewell and turn for home, leaving the bomber streams to press on alone. This was the moment the German Luftwaffe wolves were waiting for. They would rise in swarms, their Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs tearing into the lumbering bomber formations. The losses were catastrophic. Each mission saw dozens of bombers fail to return, each one a fiery tomb for a crew of 10. The strategic bombing campaign, the very hammer meant to break the enemy, was itself on the verge of being broken. Hope was a dwindling resource, measured in gallons of fuel and miles to target. Then, from across the Atlantic, came the answer. It wasn't a new strategy, but a new tool, a thoroughbred of an aircraft that seemed born for this very purpose. It was called the P-51 Mustang, initially an unremarkable fighter. Its destiny was unlocked when British ingenuity fitted it with the legendary Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. The result was a revelation. This new Mustang was not just fast, agile, and heavily armed. It possessed the one thing that mattered most: legs. Equipped with external drop tanks, its combat radius stretched to an astonishing 850 miles. Suddenly, the map of Europe looked different. There were no more lonely journeys for the bombers. No target was too deep. Berlin, the very heart of the Reich, was now within reach of an escort. The Mustang was not just a fighter, it was a promise. A promise to the bomber crews that they would no longer fly alone. That promise was put to the ultimate test on March 4, 1944. From a muddy airfield in England, a man named Colonel Arthur Vance, a leader whose quiet determination inspired fierce loyalty, prepared to lead his squadron from the 4th Fighter Group on a mission that many thought impossible. Their task: to escort the bombers all the way to Berlin and back. As the massive formations crossed into Germany, the familiar pattern began. The shorter-range fighters reached their limits and peeled away. The bomber crews steeled themselves for the inevitable onslaught, but this time, the sky did not empty. The sleek, silver silhouettes of Vance's P-51s held their position, their Merlin engines humming a reassuring anthem of defiance, when the Luftwaffe pilots rose to meet them over their own capital city. They were met, not with vulnerable bombers, but with a swarm of deadly adversaries they never expected to see. The shock was profound. These American fighters were not supposed to be here. This was their sanctuary, their untouchable heartland. The dogfights that erupted over Berlin that day were a brutal awakening. The P-51s outflew, outclimbed, and outfought their German counterparts, proving that a new king of the sky had been crowned. The news of Mustangs over Berlin sent a shockwave through the German High Command. The German Air Marshal, a man who had once boasted that no enemy bomb would ever fall on the capital, was said to have stared at the reports in disbelief. He knew, in that instant, that the strategic equation had irrevocably changed. When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, he would later admit, I knew the jig was up. There was no place left to hide. The factories, the oil refineries, the marshalling yards, every vital artery of the German war effort was now exposed to the relentless, protected pounding from the air. The P-51 had kicked down the door and torn away the last veil of safety. From that day forward, the nature of the air war was dictated on American terms. The Luftwaffe was faced with an impossible choice: allow the bombers to strike unopposed, or rise to fight and face the lethal Mustangs. They chose to fight, and in doing so, they were systematically destroyed. The P-51s didn't just protect the bombers, they actively hunted the German fighters. Every engagement became a battle of attrition that the Luftwaffe could not win. They were losing not just aircraft, but their most experienced pilotsmen, who were the backbone of their air force and who could never be replaced. The skies of Europe became a crucible where the German air arm was bled white, one dogfight at a time. This relentless campaign, made possible by the Mustang, is what ultimately achieved air superiority for the Allies. This victory was not won by pilots and planes alone. On the ground, in the cold mud and driving rain of English airfields, another army of heroes worked tirelessly. These were the ground crews, the mechanics and armorers who lived by the rhythm of the engines. They worked through the night, their hands numb with cold, to refuel, rearm, and repair the battle-scarred fighters. They patched up bullet holes, fine-tuned the Merlin engines, and ensured that every single aircraft was ready to fly the next day. A pilot's life and the success of a mission rested on the skill and dedication of these unsung men who kept the Silver Guardians flying. The air superiority forged by the P-51 was the key that unlocked the final chapter of the war in Europe. It allowed the strategic bombing campaign to reach its full, devastating potential, crippling German industry and morale. And most critically, it paved the way for the D-Day landings. When Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944, they did so under a sky that was almost entirely free of enemy aircraft. The P-51s and their fellow Allied fighters had swept the Luftwaffe from the air, preventing them from attacking the vulnerable invasion fleet and the soldiers on the beaches. Without that control of the sky, the outcome of that fateful day could have been tragically different. The long-legged fighter from America had shortened the war and saved countless lives. The legacy of the P-51 Mustang echoes through aviation history. It redefined what a fighter aircraft could and should be. After the war, long range was no longer a luxury. It was a fundamental requirement for any nation's air force. But its true story is more than one of technical achievement. It is a story of how the right tool, in the hands of the right people, can instill hope in the face of despair. It was more than a machine of war. It was a symbol, a promise, forged in aluminum and powered by a magnificent engine. A promise that no matter how far you had to go into the darkness, you would not have to go alone. It was the silver sliver of hope that changed the color of the sky and helped secure a new dawn for the world.